That night was colder and darker than usual. I had just finished working on an assignment and felt exhausted. As I was about to go to bed, the living room light flickered before going out completely. In the darkness, I could feel the temperature dropping, as if something very cold was nearby. I tried to stay calm, thinking it was just a power issue. But the longer I tried to stay calm, the more I felt an invisible presence. Soft footsteps began to echo from the hallway, faint yet distinct enough to send shivers down my spine. I held my breath, waiting for the sound to stop, but instead, the footsteps grew louder and closer. I slowly opened my bedroom door, trying to turn on the flashlight on my phone. The small beam only illuminated part of the room, casting strange and irregular shadows on the walls. I stepped out, heading towards the source of the footsteps, even though it felt like something was pulling me to stay put. When I reached the living room, the air felt unbearably cold, as if all warmth had been drained by an unseen force. I looked around, my eyes drawn to a dimly lit corner. There, I saw something that made my heart race, an old black and white photograph lying on the floor. The photo depicted a woman with a sad expression, her face seeming to look at something far beyond the frame. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on by themselves, and I felt a cold, soft touch on my shoulder. I turned around quickly, but there was no one there. When I looked back at the photograph, I felt the cold intensify. The glass frame of the photo began to crack, and the image slowly started to move, as if the woman inside wanted to escape. I ran towards the front door, only to find it locked. In a panic, I kicked the door, but it wouldn't budge. The footsteps returned, now very close, and seeming to come from behind me. I turned around, and there, in the middle of the icy living room, stood the woman from the photograph, staring at me with empty, sorrowful eyes. I felt my entire body freeze, unable to move. The only thought running through my mind was that I had to get out of there, no matter what. With one final burst of energy, I forced the door open and fled outside, ignoring the biting cold and the gnawing fear. I never went back to that house after that night. And even though I am far away now, every night I can still feel the vacant gaze of the woman from the photograph, as if she is following my every step. The weeks following that night were plagued by restless nights and unsettling dreams. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw the woman from the photograph, her sorrowful eyes haunting my sleep. Desperate for answers and peace, I began researching the house's history, hoping to uncover something that might explain the eerie encounter. I discovered that the house had once belonged to a woman named Eleanor Hastings, who had lived there in the early 1900s. According to local records, Eleanor had been a reclusive artist, known for her melancholic portraits. She vanished mysteriously one winter night, and her disappearance remained unsolved. Rumor had it that her spirit lingered in the house, unable to find peace. Determined to put an end to the haunting, I returned to the house one foggy evening. Armed with research and a sense of resolve, I approached the front door, now unlocked and slightly ajar. The cold air greeted me as I stepped inside, the familiar chill making my breath visible. The living room was as I remembered it, except for the photograph, which was now missing. I could feel an oppressive presence, and the air seemed to grow colder as I made my way to the corner where I had first found the photo. There, on the floor, was a journal, its cover dusty and worn. With trembling hands, I opened the journal. It was filled with Eleanor's sketches and writings, her pain and sadness evident in every page. One entry caught my eye. It described a desperate plea for freedom from an unseen force that had tormented her. The last entry was a heartbreaking message, To anyone who finds this, I am trapped. My spirit is bound to this place. Please, help me find peace. As I read the final words, I felt a presence behind me, growing stronger and more desperate. I turned slowly and saw the apparition of Eleanor standing near the fireplace, her eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and hope. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I didn't know." Eleanor's ghostly form seemed to soften, her expression becoming less sorrowful. I approached her cautiously, holding the journal out as a gesture of understanding. The air around us seemed to lighten, and a sense of calm began to wash over the room. In that moment, I felt a connection with her, as if my empathy and acknowledgement of her plight had given her the release she sought. The room's temperature slowly returned to normal, and Eleanor's form began to fade. "I will make sure your story is told," I promised, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. With Eleanor's spirit finally finding peace, the house seemed to exhale, the oppressive atmosphere giving way to a sense of quiet relief. I left the house with a sense of closure, knowing that I had helped to free the troubled spirit. Since then, I've kept the journal, a reminder of that chilling night and the resolution that followed. The haunting dreams have ceased, and though I still think of Eleanor from time to time, I no longer feel her presence following me. Instead, I remember her as a tragic figure whose story was finally heard and whose spirit was set free. As weeks turned into months, life began to return to normal. The oppressive chill that had once clung to me dissipated, and my dreams, once plagued by Eleanor's haunted gaze, now offered me respite. However, a lingering sense of unease remained, as if the past was never truly left behind. One crisp autumn evening, as I was sorting through some old boxes in my attic, I stumbled upon an old wooden chest that I had almost forgotten about. Inside, I found various trinkets and papers, including a beautifully ornate mirror. The mirror's frame was intricately carved with symbols I didn't recognize. Curious, I decided to clean it up and hang it in my bedroom. That night, I went to bed feeling unusually calm, but as I drifted off to sleep, I was jolted awake by a chilling sensation. I sat up in bed, my eyes drawn to the mirror across the room. The reflection it cast was unlike anything I'd seen before. In the dim light of the moon filtering through the window, I saw not just my own reflection, but the faint outline of a figure standing behind me. I turned around quickly, but the room was empty. My heart raced as I approached the mirror. The figure's features were indistinguishable, but it was unmistakably there, staring back at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Just then, a soft whisper echoed through the room. "Thank you." I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The whisper seemed to come from the mirror itself, resonating with a sense of both relief and finality. I could feel the presence of Eleanor once more, but this time, it was different. The intensity of her sadness had faded, replaced by a tranquil stillness. With a deep breath, I understood that Eleanor's spirit had finally found peace and was no longer bound by the torment of her past. The mirror seemed to shimmer for a moment, and then the figure was gone. The reflection returned to normal, leaving me with nothing but my own image. The next morning, I decided to move the mirror to the attic. I felt it was no longer a part of my life, and that Eleanor's story had reached its end. As I carried the mirror up the stairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that something profound had shifted. I left the mirror in the attic, closing the chest over it, and locked the attic door behind me. The house felt different now, lighter and warmer, as if a burden had been lifted. I began to sleep more soundly, and the sense of unease that had plagued me for so long finally dissipated. Eleanor's presence was no longer a source of fear, but rather a bittersweet memory of a soul who had been given the peace she so desperately needed. And though I would occasionally think back to that night, I no longer felt haunted. Instead, I carried with me a sense of closure and the knowledge that sometimes understanding and empathy can bring even the most restless spirits the peace they seek.